So let me introduce our special guest to you. So our first guest is Heidi Ravenscraft. So Heidi is from Central South Carolina, and she serves as the clubhouse director, which is their special needs ministry at Alive Wesleyan Church. I consider her an expert in the field. She has over 20 years experience as a public school educator in special needs. And so she was so helpful to us last week. Today, she's talking about the special needs ministry in at Alive Wesleyan Church called the Clubhouse. So I'm excited to hear from her. And then Samara, would you wave to us so we know who you are? Samara is from Roanoke, Virginia, and she serves as a board certified assistant behavior analyst. That's a big term. She's currently working on finalizing her degree to be a board certified behavior analyst, which takes the assistant out of it. Before this, she worked as an RBT, which is a registered behavior technician, for 6 years. And in these roles, she serves trauma-based kids, writes behavior treatment plans and assessments, leads de-escalation training, and is the crisis contact for those serving children in trauma in her area. So I'm so excited to have Samara. Today, she's going to be talking about tools and techniques for us. So we're pumped about it. And then my dear friend Michelle Steinhardt. Michelle, wave at all of us. Michelle is from Central South Carolina and has served as a guidance counselor for 11 years, serving elementary and middle school students, and also served for 5 years in the private sector with teens and young adults experiencing unplanned pregnancy. So she currently serves at Liberty Middle School in Liberty, South Carolina. Michelle and I have had countless conversations around the mental health crisis. And so when we decided to do this cohort, I was like, Michelle, I have to have you be a special guest of ours because she just sees stuff every day. So she's going to be talking about kids in trauma, traumatic situations, and how trauma affects them. And so I'm very excited to learn more about this topic. So if you guys have not read the book that we kind of looked at a little bit last week, it's called The Accessible Church by Kerri-Ann Hayes. Fantastic resource for you if you're looking on more information in a systematic approach to special needs ministry. I encourage you to buy that book. So we're going to jump right in today. And we're going to start with Heidi. So Heidi is going to share about being the clubhouse director at Alive and what all of that looks like in her ministry context. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Heidi, for about 15 minutes.
And don't worry, I'm setting a timer. Like, never fear, Steph. Like, I'm setting a
I
timer.
know, I'm not afraid.
So you probably should be. Um, so like Steph said, I'm the lead volunteer. There are actually two of us who help kind of just facilitate the clubhouse ministry at Alive. My other volunteer that we share the responsibilities evenly. She handles scheduling of volunteers and like weekly check-ins with parents and families and caregivers. And then I handle like the intake, like when they come to us for the first Sunday, as well as like the curriculum that we use with some of our kiddos. So we are kind of at a transition point, I feel like, for the clubhouse. There was before COVID and then there was after COVID. And I don't know if our experience is the same as it is in other churches, but the special needs families did not come back in the same way that they were prior to COVID. A lot of families that we had worked with before, after COVID, were like, oh, we have online options now. Like, I don't have to fight to put clothes on this kid, or like everything's not like I just don't have to worry about these things. I can drink my coffee in my house. Um, it's been a battle. We currently serve some preschoolers and then several older middle school, high school age students that we are transitioning out of our program. So, you know, as Stephanie shared last week, the clubhouse came to be when we had a family come in with 3 kids. that the oldest and the youngest both had Fragile X and were nonverbal autistic. So this family had their hands full. Like it, I couldn't imagine like them getting out of the house every day to go to school or to go to church, like just seemed insurmountable to me. Like, um, but they came to us and were like, "What do you have?" And we said, "We don't." Um, but it started with just a couple of volunteers and their boys. We just kind of started being their buddy. And it was a great experience for me as one of the boys' buddies, but it was also, I think I got more out of that than he did. Um, Theo was 2, he was our first kiddo. I was volunteering in the 2-year-old room the day they came. And his mom looked at me and was like, I probably know I can't leave him, but I got volunteer trained so that we can at least try it. And I was like, well, I am a special ed teacher, so why don't you just go to service? Um, and then older brother came in. Older brother had a buddy, and um, his mom actually really was the driving force behind the clubhouse and the sensory room and the program that is at Alive. Um, Steph asked me to share some of like our hardest parts of the clubhouse, and I will say right now, there's probably 2 areas that we are learning to grow the most in. And I don't see them as just, they're not barriers. They're just next steps. They're just the next thing to think about as we grow. And we're a large church, but it's still, as these kids get older and we want to serve them longer and longer, there are just those growing pains that we have to work through. So right now, a big part of what we're doing is we're figuring out, transition for um, our older kiddos. What are the goals for their family? Like, our goal is to one day provide a small group discipleship opportunity for our kids as they leave the clubhouse, but then also um, we want them to be able to worship with their families. So some of our, in fact, we have 2 older boys right now that we are doing this with. We just kind of meet with the families and determine, what is best for them. What are their goals for their kid? One student is about to graduate high school. He still has buddies, but they go with him and his mom into the family room in the service, and they are slowly, um, gradually getting him adjusted to being with just his mom. I have a buddy that I work with on Sunday mornings, and he is working on sitting in the regular worship service with his mom as well. Another thing I think has really gone well at the clubhouse is um, as they get older, we are providing them opportunities to serve. So let's say that my buddy only makes it through the music that morning and the speaker is just not his jam that week. And sometimes that happens. And he'll look at me and he'll go, Dee Dee, go. He can't say my name yet, but he can say Dee Dee, and he lets me know it's time to go. Um, and he is nonverbal. Well, not 100% nonverbal. He has a few words, but his favorite word is Bobby, who is my husband. My husband is the facilities director at Alive, and my kiddo loves trash bags and trash cans and paper towels and toilet paper. And Mr. Bobby has the key to that closet at the church. So his favorite way to serve when he is not in service is to help Mr. Bobby with the trash bags. And that is his favorite thing. In fact, this particular student also, when he was in middle school, went to school where Michelle is the guidance counselor. And he was walking around the playground asking for Bobby because the trash cans needed to be emptied. So ministry, these kids have something to offer, service wise as well. Like they can serve, they can love the church. Um, we have coffee on Sunday morning, so he might stamp the little logo on the coffee koozies. That's something we've done. Our church has a resale store. We've had our kiddos go down there and volunteer and serve at different times on Sunday mornings. So, from a special ed perspective, yes, they're serving the church. They're also getting some really good vocational skills. And I love that. And I have reached out to teachers before and been like, hey, what vocational skills are you working on with this kiddo? And we're always working to kind of make that crossover. With our younger kiddos, a lot of what we do right now is we're just kind of with our preschoolers, like we have some kids that we serve with a buddy in the regular preschool program, and the sensory room is available. Like I told those of you who were here last week, we look at being as inclusive as we can. So if that buddy, we want them with their regular ed, with their non-disabled peers as much as possible. So again, that's the special ed teacher in me coming out. And a lot, so we have probably 5 or 6 preschoolers that they're just kind of on my radar. And I know that once we get past preschool, um, probably some of the accommodations that we've been providing for them, they don't need a buddy, but they need um, just some strategies put in place. And I'm almost kind of like consult to the people that are volunteering in that classroom. What's really kind of hilarious is that my 12-year-old volunteers in the 3-year-old room. And so I had gotten just a text from a teacher that's like, hey, this little guy's having problems. I'm seeing some behaviors. Mom has shared that the child was autistic. What can we do? Da, 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 da. So at lunch that day, I'm like, so Claire, like, what's happening in the 10 o'clock service with this little guy? And she goes, such a teacher's kid. She's such a teacher's kid. She's like, Mom, he's got autism. I know he likes dinosaurs and trains. Like, I got this. I'm accommodating it. Literally, that is the word she said to me. I'm accommodating it, Mom. Lay off. Like, I got this. Um, so, our volunteers do a great job. Sometimes they just want to know that we're there if they need us. Like, they don't necessarily need another adult in the room. They just need some strategies from somebody else. But those kids are on our radar because we know once they move from our preschool program, the tree house, to our elementary program, the big house, that the dynamics are going to change, especially in a sensory manner. And so those kids may be fine in preschool, but we just kind of keep an eye on things and we're prepared to help them when they make that transition to elementary school. So at that point, they may need something different. This summer, we've also worked with a lot of our groups have been very transient. I would say we've had a lot of people in and out for the summer. We're close to 2 universities, so we get a lot of that. Um, but we've been able to offer some respite, like to a couple of pastors who were in between churches, who were going from a small church that didn't have anything to another church that didn't have any ministry. And we were able to just offer some care to them for a few weeks. We actually had several of those over the summer. And I think that was a great experience as well. We do see a lot of kids who are in the foster system. Again, like Michelle is going to talk about, we see so many kids in trauma that is the reason why they need that level of support. Um, so special ed in general is very transient. We're going to have a lot of kids in and out, and we see that in the clubhouse as well. I also have a Google form that we use for our families. And we actually just have one Google form for our volunteers and our families. So I have a giant QR code on the outside of the sensory room door. Like, just scan this. You want to volunteer? You want to come? So I will share that with Steph as well. And you're welcome to copy that into your Google Drive and use that however you would like. So, and Stephanie, you can also share my email or whatever, and I'm happy to help. even if it's just listen.
Thank you so
So
much. I have a
no
question.
problem.
So, like,
Sure.
how does it work when a new family comes in and maybe they have a child with disabilities and like they didn't tell you, like it's their first time, but like how does that work? Because I think like there's a lot of like if you don't know what their needs are and you haven't had a chance to meet with the parent, how do you navigate that?
So that is definitely a struggle that we have just tried to kind of sometimes we can accommodate that on the fly and it's not a big deal. Sometimes it requires a little bit more. One thing we try to do is, and this was part of the reason that now we have two lead volunteers for the clubhouse. So my co-lead is she's an OT. So she has some training in working with kids with disabilities, a significant amount of training. And so one of us tries to be in the building um, until about 30 minutes into the last service. So, like for instance, my family goes to the 8:30 service. I serve at the 10. I will generally stay through about 30 minutes of the 11:30 service. So, if any clubhouse families come, there's someone can that can greet them and can kind of um, figure out their way through that first week. The clincher is that it has to be somebody who can maybe handle whatever comes in the door. That it's not a situation that requires extra training or um, extra knowledge. And so I've gotten a text during the middle of the 8:30 service saying, "Hey, Heidi, we've got a new family," and I just scoot over and
Okay,
we figure it out. But we do our absolute best to provide what they need that first Sunday. But we just let them know, like, hey, this may change next week,
sure.
but we'll do our best.
Yeah, I love that. I know that Heidi has to jump off at 2, and I want to make sure that if you have a specific question for Heidi, that you can ask that. So like if you guys have questions for her, anyone have a question for Heidi right now, just in case she has to jump off early. Awesome. There may be some at the end that we think of as we go through the rest of the time together. So, Heidi, thank you so much. You're doing a beautiful
No
job. I love
problem.
what you get to do, and it means a lot that you would share all of that with us. So, I want to introduce Samara. So, Samara, I met this summer, and she works with kids in trauma with kind of all across the spectrum with autism, ADD, with behavior modifications and tools. So I'm going to kind of ask Samara some questions and she's going to kind of bounce her thoughts off of this. And if you guys have questions intermixed in that, you can stop me too. So, um, first question, Samara, what are some key indicators that a child may be struggling to adapt to a room or an environment?
Um, so I'll give you some like basic ones, but also it kind of depends on every kid. So I will say a big tip is always asking the parents kind of like what are their telltale signs? Because like some kids, it's they're like kind of walking towards the door, sometimes it's crying, sometimes they just like stand still, like no emotion, no words, no blinking, even like they'll just stand in place like a statue. Sometimes they growl, sometimes they'll tell you, I'm mad, I don't like this place. Um, but it's kind of just like looking at body language.
Mhm.
Normally you can tell just because like they're not like smiling or gravitating towards something or anything like that. But a lot of times I will ask the parent, because they know they've seen it probably 100 times before. What are some tell signs that something might escalate?
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about that a little bit. I had a really long conversation with my daughter this week, and so did Heidi. She had a situation where a child escalated to the point that she could not control what was happening in the room. And so, what are some techniques that you can give us that maybe could help a child who may be escalating in behaviors, or are there ways or steps to de-escalate a behavior before it gets out of control? Like, how do we do that?
So there's a lot of it kind of depends on the situation, but my biggest piece of advice a lot of times is to make the room either as calming as possible or potentially having a secondary room where they can go and it's not as like a sensory overload for them. So there's a calming space for them. It's safer for like the children and the other volunteers who are around. A place that, like, you can turn the lights off if they want the lights off. They have maybe a fidget that they can play with. um Another thing that I like is having pillows, because if something does happen, if a punch comes your way, if a kick comes your way, you can hold a pillow up and then it might not hit you as hard as it could have. You might be able to block it. um and then a lot of times after that, if it's getting to the point where you feel like it's out of control or you feel like you don't have the steps to bring it down, then I would contact the parents to just say, hey, we're at this point. We just need help for de escalation. And a lot of times I don't even say, like, you have to stay. Like, if you can help me de escalate this child and then we can continue on, great. Then they can go back to service. Um, or they can continue on with their day. If it gets to a point where they're just like, oh, we'll try again next week, then great, we'll try again next week.
Yeah. So helpful. I think that was one of my questions, like, when do you ask a parent to come? Because like the goal is to keep parents in service because they need the break and they need the help. Um, like, yeah, when is that time?
Yeah, I would definitely say, I also think it depends on the person on at what point do you call a parent? Because sometimes there are some volunteers who may have like a better rapport with that kid who can
Mhm.
de-escalate by, making the room quieter, by giving them something that they really enjoy. And then there are other times maybe that volunteer is out, maybe that volunteer is in service for the day, and it's just they don't have all of the tools that they need to de-escalate. So I really feel like it depends on the person who's in there, when they feel like they cannot control the situation or there is a safety risk to like other kids or themselves. That's when I would call.
Great, great wisdom. Heidi last week shared the awful story about what happened in a community right beside ours with a child who had autism. And essentially, in a nutshell, the child was at school and he escaped his classroom. Like Heidi said last week, nobody did anything wrong. He got out of the building and then they lost track. They could not catch him, and he ended up in a pond. And he passed away. And so, like, um, that has made me think so much about this conversation. And like, talk to us a little bit about how do we create an environment, or our rooms, to help with children who may elope. I think that's the correct word, right?
Yeah.
Elope, or we just call them a runner. Like, how do you do that to help prevent something like that happening?
The best way is when you're picking a room to like have your special needs ministry in, or if you're being inclusive and you're having them in the preschool room. Number one, if there's only one door, that's amazing. Sometimes that's not a possibility. So there are going to be several doors, but a lot of times, if there's one door, then you know where the one exit is. And so then it's all about body positioning. If you know you have a runner or someone who does elope, it's just about always having a person between that kid and the door. So you don't always have to be standing right at the door, but you want to make sure that you're standing somewhere in the vicinity between them. So if they're running towards that door, then you're in front of them. You're there to stop, to block the door if you need to say like, hey, let's start the de-escalation process of like, what can we do for you? How can we help you? And really just figuring out, okay, what's making you run right now? And then once you figure that out, then you can kind of get them back into the activity, and then go back to just having your body positioning in between the child and the door. And if there's two doors, or multiple exits, then a lot of times it's just being aware of where all of the volunteers are and kind of having one volunteer in the vicinity of each exit. I think that's mostly what you can do with the fire laws. It gets a little tricky when there's like fire regulations in place, but that's probably the easiest one, is having like the body positioning.
Yeah. Okay. Now I have this is a tough question. Okay. But I'm going to ask it. Say you have a child that's running, and we all know like we're not supposed to grab a child or put our hands on a child or whatever. Like, how do you stop it? Like, what does that look like?
Body positioning
Okay.
and your hand placement. So you don't necessarily have to like grab a child to block them from a certain way. It's once again like your body positioning, like you can put yourself in between the doorway. Sometimes you have to be aware that like when you put yourself in that doorway, that something else might be coming. A kick might be coming, a hit might be coming if they're mad that you're blocking or like frustrated that you're blocking that doorway. But also if you put your hands out and if you have an open hand, you don't have to grab a kid. You can just block like literally with your body. And then as long as you're not pushing back, you're not being forceful. You're just using like your body pretty much as another wall or another doorway. So that's kind of like the best way to do it. And then a lot of times is if they're like out of the room or something, I would call for parents because parents can move them. If they're in the room and you can just stand in the doorway, then as long as you're not like grabbing like with a closed hand or like wrapping your arms around them, just literally being a wall, it's not necessarily like restricting their movement or anything like that.
So, what are some suggestions that you would give to us on like some sensory toys or resources or things that we can use in our environments? Maybe we don't have a separate room, but we need some sensory objects or whatever. What would you recommend for that?
Um, I have an Amazon list. Do you want me to share it? Do you want to share it?
For sure. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Okay, hold on, I have to pull it up. But I'll tell you, I think that there's two ways you can do sensory bins. You can do like a sensory bin, which has like rice or beans or sand or something like that. That's a sensory, just like a play center. And I do not fill them up more than halfway because you never know what's coming. But a lot of times it's way cheaper to do that. I did put one on my Amazon list from, oh, I must have closed it. I did put one on my Amazon list just so you can kind of see it, like what it's supposed to look like.
I can share the Amazon list in the chat. Send it out.
Oh no, I don't know that it's gonna let me open it up. I just had it open. This is what happens when you share your Amazon account with family members. It doesn't let you in.
Well, maybe just like describe what some of those things are in there.
Yeah, so some of the things are like stretchy bands, things that they can like stretch, pull on. There are some, I want to know, oh, some walking stones. A lot of kids like to like walk across stones. Some of the other things that I put in there were some like tilty globes where like it looks like a waterfall's coming down.
Okay.
Like the color comes down. I know a lot of kids who love those. They just love to watch them. So that's a fun things. Another thing I put in there are textured mats. So they're like just mats where they can either like walk on them, they can feel them, you can put them on the wall where they can touch them. just so like there's different textures. It just feels different on their hands or their feet or their body, wherever they like rub against it. Another thing that's kind of on there there's like these hexagon connecting lights where you can touch it and it changes a bunch of different colors. That's something that a lot of time I see is like soothing for some kids, is literally just to like touch and like all of the lights are changing. Um, Bubbles is another good sensory one. It's kind of hard to do inside because they can be messy, but if you found something that either looked like bubbles that was like contained, that's in there. I want to say there was some other stuff. Oh, head scratchers. That's a kind of a interesting one, but you know those little head scratchers that you can like put on your head. Some kids love like pressure on their head, or like a back scratcher. You can scratch their back with it. It's more of like a kid. If you can ask the kid if they like it, it kind of helps because sometimes they don't like it. But sometimes they'll tell you that they like that. Some kids also like squeezes. I've had kids come up to me and like ask for squeezes, which is not on the Amazon list. That's just something you do. But if the kid asks for them, a lot of times they just like you to just like very softly, like just squeeze their arm or like their shoulders or something, almost like a massage, not like a hard pressure, but just like a massage kind of thing. It just sometimes calms them down. I bet you anything somebody will have a parent that says, oh, a good de-escalation tool is literally just pressure. Sometimes it's just like calming for them. So that's another sensory thing.
Awesome. I remember Alex had mentioned, and I don't know if she mentioned this last week or not, I can't remember, but there's, the lights you can put, you can buy, what are they called? They're like
Covers.
a cover to
Mhm.
kind of make the light not be so bright. And they have some that have like clouds on them and all different shapes. They're really cool. I think you can get those on Amazon as well. I loved those when she showed those to us.
Yeah, they're super helpful, especially just not having the room so bright, because there are kids who have like aversions to bright lights, loud noises, fast movement, things like that.
Yeah, and then headphones obviously like are good tools, great things. Are there certain headphones that people should buy?
I don't think I added that to the Amazon list, but I could. You just want the ones like they look kind of bulky,
Mm-hmm.
like noise canceling. So
Noise
pretty
cancel.
much if it says like noise canceling, that's helpful. But you just have to remember that if a kid asks for them and you put them on, sometimes they're not going to hear you if you're talking. So you have to like pay their attention to say like, hey, like, do you need this? Or maybe like talk a little louder, not necessarily like yell at them, but so I've run into that problem before where I'm like, I've been talking to you for 10 minutes. And then I have to realize like, oh, you have noise canceling headphones on.
Yes,
Okay.
I love it. Thank you so much. Anyone have any questions for Samara?
Hi, Sam.
Hi, Paul.
Hi. I know Sam. She's great, but I did have Sam. Could you speak for a minute on what we do when you encounter a child, not necessarily with autism, but with more like oppositional defiance, and they're just locked in there. They don't want you to do what you want them to do, or they don't want to go where you want them to go. What's the best way to deal with that?
Yeah, a lot of it, number one, something that kind of does help you can try is using like a slight reverse psychology of just saying like, oh, like if they want to go home, just be like, oh, you want to go to your mom? And a lot of times they'll be like, no, I don't. Like they do want to be involved, but they don't want you telling them, like you saying this is what we have to do. Um, I don't use it a whole bunch, but sometimes it does help with ODD, operational defiance disorder. Sorry, I shortened that, but sometimes it does help with that. Another thing is using like first then statements and saying like first we can do this and then like giving them a break or telling them like okay we can have 5 minutes to do like what they're asking to do, to kind of just help them like get involved with the group but also kind of getting what they want, and kind of just like almost like a compromise, like you do this for me for 5 minutes and then we can go do what you want for 5 minutes.
Where,
Anyone?
and where is the line between um being firm and, like getting in their face and like, you got to do this right now?
It's it's kind of a difficult line with ODD just because in a church setting, you can tell them like we have to do this, but like you can't necessarily make them do it. So you kind of just have to find the line of like this is what we're doing, this is what we can do, like this is what we're doing. And then if you need to get the parents involved and say like, "Hey, this is what we've tried. We are trying to get them involved. Do they have anything?" Because every kid is different. A lot of parents have techniques. So if you do run into a wall, just ask the parents. Sometimes they might not know. Um, and then you guys can kind of brainstorm together. If this is like a certain kid at the church, Paul, I can help you. Um, I can learn more information and kind of guide you a little better, but that's kind of like where I would see, just see like if the parents have like those any techniques that they use, anything that's kind of helpful in their household. And that sort of thing.
Thank you.
No problem.
Situation where if I've given a child two options, both with the end result of where I would like this to go, that seemed to be most helpful for us too. And just saying, okay, well, you can bunny hop to small group, or you can walk backwards. I don't know, something fun or crazy. So it gets them kind of moving that direction without saying, go to small group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, another thing with the options too is if you give them two options, like go to small group or something that you know that they don't like, then most likely they're going to choose small group. That's another helpful trick. I've done that a lot actually, because it makes them feel like they're making the choice and that they're in control, but and really you knew that you gave them like a more adversive option than the one that you want them to go to.
We're going to jump into what Michelle's going to talk to us about. And then at the very end, we'll open it up for questions for a little bit more time. So I know what Michelle has to say is great. So Michelle and I, like I said, we've had so many conversations about kids' mental health, and especially after COVID. And so I just invited her to talk a little bit about through some of that. So I wrote some questions down, and Michelle's going to kind of try to answer some of those. So thanks for being here, Michelle. So can you give us some insight on what you're seeing on the local school level regarding kids in crisis or from traumatic backgrounds? Like, what are they facing? What are they dealing with? What are you seeing?
Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up? Okay. Sorry, I was having some sound issues earlier, but I'm on my cell phone, so hopefully this is going to work just fine. So I'm a school counselor at a Title I middle school. I'm in a rural town just down the road from where Steph and Heidi and I live. About 75% of my children live in poverty here. So about 3 out of 4 of them are experiencing a lot of the trauma that is common for children that live in those situations. So what we're regularly seeing is abuse, neglect, consistent lack of physical needs being met. There is certainly some death of a primary caregiver or loss of a primary caregiver to abandonment. Regularly seeing or observing domestic abuse in the home. My students, quite a few of them have a very high involvement with DSS, which is, I'm not sure if you guys are all over the nation, but here that's Department of Social Services. So those are the people that maybe CPS in your state. So those often do result, those inquiries and those investigations do often result in moving in and out of primary homes into placements in foster care or kinship caregiver. There's sometimes these traumatic events are like one-time big, huge traumatic events, but I would say more often we are just seeing students who live in a combination of persistent high stress situations that just never really resolve. And those also create trauma responses in those students.
So maybe you did this, but how would you define trauma in a child?
So I would say, trauma in general, any event that is frightening, dangerous, potentially violent, that has led a child to either a real or just a perceived threat to their well-being. And I think the additional piece that goes along with the childhood trauma is this could also be true of observing a traumatic event to the security of a loved one. So in childhood, their sense of safety so dependent upon the perceived safety of their loved ones, their caregivers, their mom, their dad, their grandparents. And so experiencing a traumatic event can also result in those children experiencing that as well. So many of my students have broken relationships with their primary caregiver, whether that is sometimes a death. It is actually somewhat common in my student population. And much more frequently, it's abandonment. So it's children who haven't seen a parent since they were tiny, and maybe have even lived from home to home. But just down the road in Central, we have a huge influx of refugees and immigrant children. And their trauma that they're experiencing is going to be very different from what I'm seeing right here. Those children may be living in war. They may be experiencing terrorism. They may be experiencing civil unrest. And those are also all traumatic events that are going to manifest similarly behaviorally, but certainly very different from what students and children in maybe first world poverty are experiencing.
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking to hear everything that you're
Yes.
saying. Like it's hard for me to just wrap my brain around it. And so like you said, all of those things like abuse, neglect, lack of physical needs, abandonment, high stress. What does this do to a child's everyday? Like they
Mhm.
have to still come to school. They have to be there. Like, how does it affect all of that?
Mhm. Um, I mean, it impacts everything. It impacts everything. It looks like, it manifests in so many different ways. What we see a lot, and I speak very educational jargon a lot, and I apologize if I hope it still all translates, but we expect things like maybe anxiety, maybe depression, maybe like PTSD related symptoms, but so often trauma also manifests in ways that may look like other things. So maybe a student is struggling with task completion. Maybe they are just regularly struggling with impulsivity and difficulty maintaining focus in class. And immediately all of our brains go, this is a student with ADHD. Or you may have a kid with just extremely poor emotional regulation, difficulty understanding emotions from other people, difficulty self-regulating when they're stressed. And then you're like, oh, maybe this is autism, or maybe this is some other neurodivergent diagnosis. And all of that could be signs and symptoms of trauma and traumatic stress. So I would say very commonly, these kids just have very poor emotional regulation, or just inappropriate emotional responses. So common situations to maybe a neurotypical child or a child who's not experienced trauma cause just very intense reactions, small changes, and even maybe typically fun experiences to a different child can create stress and difficulty with regulating. So this creates conflict over reactions in social situations, really feeds conflict, difficulty maintaining healthy relationships. So that's even more challenging for those kids to foster steady relationships. They already struggle with, maybe loss or lack of healthy, stable relationships. So it's just this cycle that continues for them. And trauma impacts our brains and it impacts our nervous system. And so those students, we are even, learning, research is even showing impacts on memories. So a child who lives in trauma, those really negative, intense, traumatic experiences become more salient in their memory, whereas maybe those everyday positive experiences are difficult to recall and far less prominent. So my boss and we've worked through actually an unusually high amount of traumatic stuff this school year, just in the first quarter that we've had so far. And she kind of, not at all flippantly, but she's like, a student left my room and she's like, okay, now go take testing, right? And it's nothing funny about it, but the heavy irony here is none of those, everybody's probably familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. None of those low level needs are being met. So that level 1 need of safety and food and shelter, and those level 2 needs of connection and safety, none of that's being met. But we're asking them to come way up here and achieve and take state testing and focus in class and complete this stuff that you missed when you were out 6 days in a row because your mom was homeless and you had to go stay with an aunt an hour and a half away. It's just completely, it's at the very least, it is a constant uphill battle for these students to do any of those things.
I'm kind of just emotional, like quite honestly, like thinking about the kids in our communities. Like there's so many that face this, and this is why I asked Michelle to be on, because she just brings a real perspective to the kids that are walking into our environments. Not all of them. Some of them are from beautiful, awesome homes, and some of them are really struggling. So I apologize for being emotional, but it's really hard to listen to, and yet this is what they face. And so, like, bringing reality to that, I felt like was so important to us. So I think my next question feeds into this is, okay, now that like we just heard what you said, what wisdom would you give to us as local church leaders on how to best love and care and minister to the kids that are in these traumatic situations? Like what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
From your perspective, like I recognize you're in a school system, but like we don't I think the problem is we don't know all of what they're going through
Mm-hmm.
that a school leader would know. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're coming in and they're not telling us.
Mm-hmm.
So we see all these things exhibited potentially. So like how do we love them well? Like how do we care for their families well?
Absolutely. And so, as I shared, Steph and Heidi and I live in the same community. And I can tell you, as a believer who also works in the public school system, my church and the local capital C church has been absolutely crucial to the health of my student community. And what this has looked like is sometimes it's just things like, for example, we have a lot of mentors in my school, and I would say there are a few whose stories I don't know, but I would say close to 100% of them I know are believers and have been recruited from the local church. And so those people are coming in with a heart for the trauma and the poverty that they're seeing in the lives around them. And they are coming in and they're sitting and having lunch with a kid once a week. And they are just as much as possible being a stable, present adult in those students' lives. And as obvious as it sounds, honestly, meeting the physical needs of the kids in these spaces is also crucial. For example, my church youth pastor is working to hopefully next summer provide lunches and maybe dinner once a week dinner, and then lunches for the following week for all of the students that come to youth group on Wednesday night that need it. So recognizing that during the summer, our kids are hungry, because in my county, breakfast and lunch is free for all students. And we know that we have a serious food insufficiency in households, and that when kids leave us for the summer, they're hungry. So our local church is trying to meet that need by doing that. And also, I love that you guys are talking about having trauma-informed care of students that are in your churches. That is beautiful. Like, just having this conversation is a step in the right direction, and having those conversations as you train volunteers to just always be aware that there may be students who are walking in with baggage that we just simply cannot begin to imagine. We keep a lot of trauma sensitive spaces within our school. And Sam kind of shared a little bit about this, but often just being aware of kind of those triggers and those signs that a student is escalating and struggling, and having places where things are just quiet, where things are calm, where they can exit the neon dance party in the youth group room, or they're just overwhelmed and overstimulated, but they know that they have a safe space to step out. I think, and I just feel like I have to mention this in the wake of what the last 2 weeks ago looked like, but the church's role in the heartbreaking event of community trauma and community tragedy is also crucial. I have been, unfortunately, multiple times in my career called into a school. When a tragedy happens in a community, the counselors from all of the area schools come in to support. And every time I've walked into this room where there's been a suicide, or there's been a tragic death of a student or a teacher or something like that, every time I walk in to a room full of pastors that are handing out snacks and handing out tissues and hugging kids, they don't have any idea what to say, but they're present. And I could get emotional talking about that, because every single time that's happened to me, I've experienced that. And I know we live in South Carolina, and the church and the school involvement is probably a little more allowable than in other spaces, and I understand that as well. But I think it's important to recognize that the church's presence in all of that is so crucial, so crucial. We don't have enough resources without the church's help. We just don't.
Everything you said is beautiful. Yeah, I'm such a big believer in the church being a part of the local school if it's at all possible.
Mhm.
A lot of times I think that we don't take the step to go ask, and honestly, just ask, because most of the time they're going to say yes. We've found
Yes.
to be very true. So as you've been talking, Michelle, I just found out about something through the Wesleyan Church that maybe you guys know about, but I didn't know about it. So it's through Hepzibah 62:4. So they have trauma-informed care training that churches can take, as well as you can lead teams through it. I can definitely put links for that in the chat. I found out about this like 2 weeks ago, and I was like, why didn't I know about this? And so
Mhm.
there's lots of different ways you can be a part of that. And so I can give you contact information for that, but that is something that is offered through the Wesleyan Church. So I would definitely encourage you to check that out. Michelle, any other trauma informed care resources that you feel would be beneficial for us as ministry leaders to learn from or to look into?
I think something that's just really very telling that I think we in education are talking about something called ACEs a lot. Some of you might
Say that
have
again?
heard of that. ACEs, it stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACE. But this is some research that has been done into specifically this list of life events that, when checked off, create an ACEs score. And the higher that score is, the more likely you are going to see wear and tear on the body and the brain of a child. And I recently went to a training where we all took the ACEs exam for ourselves. And it was very emotional, it was very hard, but I think it was also just incredibly eye-opening to what sort of life events we are looking at that create not only traumatic experiences, but then long-term impacts to those children's health and wellness. I know there is a trauma-informed church website that looked like it had some neat resources on it. I have not vetted that thoroughly, but I did dig around in it a little bit last night, and it looked pretty good. I'm very excited to hear about this Hepzibah thing. I had not heard of that before, so that's awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Michelle, such wisdom. And I think just hearing it from the perspective of someone who sees it on the everyday is just different than us seeing it once a week on a Sunday potentially and wondering what's going on.
Mhm.
So I think that was just beautiful information for some things that we can look for. what questions do you guys have for Michelle or anyone that's on the panel before we kind of break and end this?
I don't really have a question at this point, but I've just finished reading this book.
Trauma Informed Children's Ministry.
It's by Robert G. Crosby and Lori A. Crosby. But I found it was, it covered a lot. It was very, from my perspective, had a lot of good information in there as well.
Thank you so much. I did not know about that book. Anyone else?
Just something to add to what Michelle was saying. I know we are very lucky where we live that we have a very close relationship between our local body and our school system. But I also, I'm a third generation teacher, public school teacher, and I've never seen a principal or an administrator turn down help at one of those moments of crisis. Because when you have a grieving student body because a student has passed away in a car accident the night before, or you have just something awful that happens, I've never seen them turn away a pastor who said, I'm just here. I just got food. I just got food and some tissues. And can I just be? So even the most resistant of pastor or of administrators never turns that down.
Great word, Heidi. Anything else?
I have like a very logistical question. So this is something like I'm really entering into, like even having been in ministry for a number of years, like this is a conversation that I have not really entered into a whole lot, if I'm just being really honest within that. But one of the things I've struggled with is wanting to be able to have an inclusive room and an inclusive environment and to have some of those sensory activities and things available. But the challenge that I'm running into is how to navigate the kids who see other kids with fidget or sensory toys, who then think that they need something, but for them it's a distraction. And so I am practically trying to figure out the best way to enter into a conversation where, hey, we are all in one space because that's the only option that I have in my church context. But how do I have certain things available for the kids that actually need and would benefit from it, and versus allowing the kid who doesn't but sees their best friend have it. And I've had some issues with a couple of my older elementary girls where one would benefit and one doesn't but thinks that she would, but for her it'd be a toy and a distraction to her and to everyone else. So I guess I'm just looking for any thoughts within that conversation.
It's funny how similar our issues are because that happens at school as well. We frequently say here, fair is not always equal. And it's not. And so when you're thinking about students, whether from trauma or who have a special need or diagnosis of some sort, it's about equal access to that experience, whether that's curriculum in the classroom or whether that's that church experience and being able to engage in the teaching there. And of course you have to protect privacy, but we do, I feel pretty comfortable in saying you gotta worry about yourself. I'm going to take care of this and you worry about yourself. And I know school's a little different from church where you're welcoming and you're loving and you want everybody to come back. They got to come here to me so I can have some of those tough talks. I don't know if Heidi has some thoughts on that, but I know that is a challenge.
Yeah, that is the phrase I use a lot with my own biological children, who may need very different things, or consequences or opportunities or whatever. Fair is not always equal. And again, I'm like Michelle, this is why it's good that I have a co-leader in the clubhouse, because sometimes she's like, Heidi, tone it down. You're not at school. You don't have to act like that. Because it's like, I go back and forth between okay, fair is not always equal. And then sometimes, depending on the situation, I have to ask myself, okay, Heidi, what's the worst thing that could happen? How bad is it if I offer this fidget to this other kid? sometimes, like, I've been in professional developments with nothing but a bunch of teachers who, one, teachers are the worst behaved people when they are an audience all the time, 100%. But they put baskets of fidgets on our tables, and we all were like using them to pay attention. So sometimes I just have to ask myself, like, okay, like, if I offer that, is that the end of the world? And if I only have 2 or 3 of them and I give them out to like my kiddo and 2 other kids, well, maybe in 5 or 10 minutes, there's going to be another kid who legitimately has a need. And I'm going to go to that neurotypical kid and I'm going to say, hey, buddy, he really needs to borrow that. So why don't I take that from you and go give it to him? But then sometimes you just like lay the smack down and they're like, sorry, it's just not the way the world works. And again, that's why I have another person, because she says that a lot sweeter than I just did.
It's a beautiful opportunity to teach compassion, though, while still protecting, other students' privacy. The rest of your life, you're going to encounter situations where people's journey to the same spot you're at might have been easier or harder or had more obstacles or fewer. The bottom line is that it can be a really powerful opportunity to teach children about that inclusivity and that compassion. And, we give these things out to help focus. Is that going to help you or is that going to distract you? From what I've seen from you, I think it might be a distraction. I'm willing to let you try, maybe something like that, or that's tough
And
everywhere,
I think
though.
sometimes sharing those tools and those things, like if you have the availability to share it, like I have 6 pairs of noise canceling headphones and like 4 different sizes. And so sometimes that removes the stigma. If somebody's like, hey, you got another pair of those? Like, can I wear those?
Yeah.
Sure. I don't care. Like, there's no harm or foul. Like, there's no one that needs that right now. So, okay. And then a lot of times it kind of removes that stigma of like, well, why is that kid wearing those headphones?
Absolutely.
Well, it just helps take out some of that extra noise, and so it just kind of removes that stigma. And then if it becomes a problem, you treat it like you would any other behavioral issue within the children's ministry. I say all that, but I'm like, my tendency is to be like, this is not for you. And that's where the Lord is working on me. Like, I can break out of that Enneagram but 1 box that I'm in, and I can share. But yeah, sometimes it breaks the stigma.
Helpful.
A lot of times too is like you can tell kids like, oh, like my friend needs this right now, but like if you have free time at the end or if you have like a break, like I know sometimes church may not be over and your lesson is over, you can say, oh, we can't have it right now, but if we have extra time at the end, then you can play with it for however long, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever. And it kind of gives them something to look forward to, like, oh, I can't have it right now, my buddy has it right now, but I can have a turn later if there's time.
Thank you guys so much. Heidi just jumped off. She had to go to another meeting, but Michelle, Samara, thank you so much for your wisdom, your guidance. I know this is not going to just help the people on this call. I've already had someone email me while we were on this concert. I can't wait for the recording. And so like it will be available to them for a long time from here on out. And your wisdom was just beautiful. So thank you for helping us, but also thank you for what you do for loving those kids. And so look for an email from me, you guys, in the next day or so, and I'll get the stuff to you. But I hope y'all have a great rest of the week and that you learned a whole lot today. Y'all take care. Thank you.
Bye.